What if everything about you, your calm, your kindness, your success, was ignored the second you stepped into first class because of the color of your skin? On the surface, Flight 512 was routine, a smooth coast-to-coast journey on a luxury carrier. But for the Hale family, Quinton, a composed investment strategist, Talia, a respected professor, Zuri, their brilliant teenage daughter managing silent battles, and Cairo, just 7, full of questions and wonder, it became something else entirely. From the moment they boarded, they weren't seen as accomplished travelers, but as intruders. A flight attendant with a polished smile and a cruel agenda made sure of that. What unfolded next wasn't just a series of humiliations. It was a calculated campaign of bias, microaggressions, and veiled cruelty. They said nothing. They didn't yell. They didn't argue. But sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the sound before the storm. This is not just one flight. It's an unraveling, a reckoning, and a reminder that power doesn't always announce itself. It watches, it waits, and then it rises. If you believe in stories that expose the truth, stand for dignity, and end with justice, like this video, subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And have you ever seen something like this happen? The cabin doors are closing. Buckle up. The truth's about to take off. Loretta Sloan stood at the front of the Aero West Prestige first-class cabin, her pressed uniform flawless, every blonde strand of hair locked into a neat bun. 15 years on the job had shaped her into a master of perception, who belonged, who didn't, who would ask for extra blankets, who might not tip. She scanned the boarding passengers like a customs agent looking for contraband, her practiced smile flashing only for those she deemed worthy. When the Hale family appeared at the cabin door, her lips tightened just slightly. Subtle, but sharp-eyed travelers could see it. Quinton Hale walked in first, tall and composed, his tailored charcoal suit moving like silk. Talia followed with graceful steps, carrying a leather tote, her expression calm, protective. Zuri, 16, wore noise-canceling headphones and a gray hoodie, keeping close to her mother. Little Cairo, barely 7, skipped a few steps ahead, clutching a toy glider. All 4 bore first-class boarding passes. All 4 were black. Loretta's smile froze in place as she took a slight step forward. "Good evening," she said, lips barely moving. "May I see your tickets?" Quinton handed them over with quiet confidence. Loretta stared at them longer than necessary. "First class," she murmured, flipping one over as if looking for invisible ink. "All 4 of you?" Talia tilted her head. "Is there a problem?" "Oh no," Loretta replied, quickly faking a smile. "We just don't often see full families seated together in row 1. She handed the tickets back and stepped aside. "Welcome aboard." Quinton didn't respond. He simply nodded and guided his family to their seats. Behind her, Loretta whispered to the junior attendant beside her, barely audible. "First class sure changed." The younger woman gave a tight, uncertain smile, but said nothing. As the Hale family settled into seats 1A through 1D, Loretta's eyes followed every move. Quinton placed his briefcase overhead. Talia helped Zuri adjust her hood. Cairo gazed out the window in awe. They weren't loud. They weren't disruptive. But to Loretta, they were a disturbance. An inconvenience to the image she believed first class should uphold. She returned to the front of the cabin and tapped her earpiece. "Dispatch," she whispered. "Confirm Hale family's ticket status, please." "Confirmed," came the voice after a pause. "They booked these seats 6 weeks ago. Paid in full." Loretta clicked off her mic and set her jaw. When the next couple boarded, white dressed in leisure casual, laughing about a wine tasting in Napa, Loretta greeted them with a grin wide enough to show teeth. "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Downing. Drinks will be served shortly." Cairo turned to his mother. "Why didn't you smile at us, Mommy?" Talia gave his hand a gentle squeeze. Some people forget their manners. Moments later, Loretta made her way down the aisle with a clipboard. She stopped at row 1 again. "I just need to double-check meal preferences," she said curtly. She asked the Downings, "No such thing." Quinton raised an eyebrow. "We already submitted those online." Loretta shrugged. "We like to verify. Mistakes happen." As she turned to leave, she murmured just loud enough especially when things get shuffled around. Her voice didn't reach the rest of the cabin, but Zuri caught it. Her fingers tightened around her headphones. Her hoodie shielded her face, but her eyes were locked forward, alert. Loretta stopped once more near the cockpit door, pulled her phone from her pocket, and tapped out a text. Row 1 full of attitude. Eyes on them. The hum of the aircraft settled as passengers continued boarding, but tension lingered in the air around row 1. Loretta moved through the cabin with mechanical efficiency, pausing only when her eyes drifted back to the Hale family. Her gaze, cool and clinical, landed on Zuri first. The girl was quietly sketching in a small notebook, hood still drawn, headphones on. Loretta's lips curled slightly as she leaned toward the junior attendant again. Keep your eye on the girl in 1B. Something's off. Might be anxiety or worse. The other woman hesitated, but nodded. Loretta made her way to the front galley, pulled out the manifest clipboard again, and tapped her pen twice, theatrically. She re-entered row 1 and stood stiffly. Quick head count. Just protocol. She pointed to each of them in turn like they were school children on a field trip. Quinton looked up but said nothing. Loretta turned abruptly, dismissing them without another word. When she stopped at row 2 to greet the newly boarded Winchesters, an elderly white couple, her entire demeanor changed. Let me know if the lighting's too harsh, Mrs. Winchester. We have 3 dimming settings just for your comfort. She adjusted the light above them personally. Minutes passed. Zuri adjusted her headphone wire slightly and asked her mother in a whisper, "Can I switch to the window seat?" Before Talia could respond, Loretta's voice cut in sharply from across the aisle, as if she had been waiting. "Seat assignments are final, young lady. If you wanted to sit by the window, it should have been chosen at booking." Talia's face remained calm, but she placed a hand gently on Zuri's arm as if to ground her. Quinton kept his eyes on the back of the seat in front of him, jaw clenched, knuckles pale. The tension had begun to throb beneath their row, like engine pressure rising before takeoff. Cairo tugged at his shoelaces, accidentally bumping the seat in front. Loretta spun back around and snapped, "Let's keep our feet down, sweetheart. This isn't a jungle gym." The elderly man in row 2 glanced back briefly, then returned to his newspaper. No one said a word. When drink service began, Loretta offered every passenger in first class a cloth napkin, a warm towel, and crystal glasses. At row 1, she handed the Hales disposable cups and no towels. "We're short on amenities today," she said flatly. A lie. The tray beside her was still stacked with supplies. Talia looked at the lukewarm water in her hand. Zuri accepted hers without a word. Cairo's plastic cup was half-filled and sloshed. "Don't spill it, okay?" Loretta said. Her voice sounded sweet on the surface, but Cairo shrank back slightly in his seat. The older gentleman across the aisle, Mr. Collins, leaned slightly forward and asked, "Is everything all right here?" Loretta flashed her professional smile. "Just fine, Mr. Collins. We're keeping the cabin calm and efficient." She passed down the aisle again, but not before leaning to the junior attendant. "I've flagged them for noise and disorder potential." The note would go on the internal flight report, a digital shadow that could haunt them on future trips. Zuri shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly aware of the extra attention. Her pencil paused on the page. Talia whispered, "Focus on your drawing, sweetheart." But the line on the page was no longer smooth. As dinner orders were taken, Loretta asked every other row with care dietary needs, timing preferences, drink pairings. When she got to the Hales, her voice turned curt. "Beef or chicken?" Quinton replied, "My wife's vegetarian." Loretta tapped her pen once. "We don't have vegan meals left. Next time, note that in advance." She didn't check the manifest. She didn't ask what the children wanted. She simply moved on. Minutes later, a tray of steaming steak and roasted vegetables was placed before Mr. Collins. The Hales received dry rolls, cold pasta, and no sides. Loretta didn't look back. When Cairo asked, "Do we get juice?" Loretta paused mid-step. "This is a premium cabin," she said. "We don't stock fruit punch. Sparkling water is better for digestion." Her tone made it sound like a lecture. Cairo blinked. Zuri slowly lowered her fork. Talia tried to catch Quinton's eye, but he stared straight ahead. It wasn't fear. It was restraint. The kind that came from knowing exactly what would happen if he reacted, what assumptions would follow. Loretta moved between rows with grace and precision, her mask firmly in place, but her eyes gleamed coldly every time she passed row 1. From start to finish, her mission was clear. They didn't belong. There, her posture stiffened just slightly, her expression cooled by a degree only perceptible to those trained to notice microaggressions. The air felt heavier around their seats, though the temperature had not changed. Zuri reached down to unzip the side pocket of her backpack, quietly retrieving a small sketchbook she had brought to pass the time. She didn't disturb anyone, didn't even shift much in her seat. Yet seconds later, Loretta appeared at her side like a silent hawk, tone clipped and disapproving. Please refrain from overfilling the seat pocket. That violates FAA policy. Zuri blinked up at her, confused. Her sketchbook was in her hands, not even stored yet. But it's not, she began, only to stop as Loretta's gaze bore down with the kind of judgment that didn't invite discussion. Let's keep everything clear, she added, then turned sharply and moved away before Zuri could explain. A few seats back, the air was lighter. Mr. and Mrs. Holbrook, a cheerful couple in row 3, received a tray of complimentary desserts, 2 delicate mousse cups, a warm apple tart, and a handwritten note from the in-flight chef. We hope this sweetens your journey, Loretta had said to them earlier, with a smile that showed teeth. She returned to the front galley and retrieved a tray for the rest of first class, rows 2 through 5, all except row 1. When she reached the Hales, she didn't even glance down. Apologies, our dessert cart didn't cover everyone. I'll bring you something if there's time, she said without breaking stride. Behind her, a tray of untouched mousse still sat under a cloth in the galley. Quinton saw it, saw her lie, but said nothing. Cairo, ever observant, peeked through the narrow slit of the galley curtain and whispered, I saw cookies. Big ones. His eyes sparkled for a moment before Loretta's form filled the aisle again. That's not for you, she said firmly. Please keep your eyes forward and don't peer into restricted areas. Talia's lips tightened, but she didn't speak. Instead, she reached over and gently turned her son's face back toward the window. Cairo's reflection in the glass looked confused, small, muted. As Loretta moved away, she stopped by Mr. Collins, who was reading quietly in row 2. Would you care for a second glass of Merlot, Mr. Collins? We've just opened a fresh bottle. He accepted it with a polite nod. Then, glancing discreetly toward the Hales, he asked in a low voice, Everything all right up front? Loretta straightened, her smile still intact. Oh yes, just monitoring things closely. Some passengers need more supervision than others. Mr. Collins nodded slowly, the meaning registering, though he said nothing more. A bit later, as turbulence gently rocked the cabin, Loretta began her seat belt check. She moved swiftly through the rows until she reached Cairo. That doesn't look secure, she said sharply, crouching without warning and yanking the strap tight across his waist. Cairo's body jerked slightly from a force. He looked up, startled, unsure if he had done something wrong. We buckle properly here, she said, standing upright as if she had completed a noble duty. Cairo gave a tiny nod, his fingers curling against the armrest. Zuri, watching from beside him, pulled her hood a little further forward, her face shadowed now beneath it. Her sketchbook remained closed. Her pencil never left her lap. Talia sat still as stone, hand resting on Cairo's shoulder, silently absorbing every act of humiliation. She knew the language Loretta spoke, one of control, of passive aggression masquerading as professionalism. She had seen it in faculty lounges and boardrooms for years. The only difference now was that it was being served at 36,000 feet with a silver coffee cart. Loretta continued her rounds, but she wasn't just managing comfort. She was building a narrative. Back in the galley, she opened the flight report system on the tablet tucked behind the espresso machine. She began typing with clinical precision. Passenger 1D, minor disruption during beverage service. Passenger 1A, resistance to safety instructions. Passenger 1B, Signs of emotional instability. Monitor closely. She paused a beat, then added, recommend additional screening on return leg. She saved the file. This entry would now follow them on Arrow's internal system. Not a red flag, but enough to raise an eyebrow the next time their names appeared in the booking list. Enough to slow them down. Enough to remind them they were being watched. Returning to the cabin, Loretta moved like a monarch surveying a province. She adjusted a pillow here, offered a refill there, and passed row 1 without eye contact. Zuri tried to shrink into her seat, her knees pulled up slightly now, her hands wrapped tightly around her sketchbook like it was something precious and private. Quinton sat with one arm resting across the armrest, and the other hand clenched beneath his folded jacket. His eyes stared at nothing. Not the screen in front of him, not the aisle, not even the window. He had slipped into a place many black men knew too well, the quiet space of endurance. Suddenly, Cairo asked too loudly, "Why don't we get the chocolate cake?" The cabin went quiet for a beat. Loretta, halfway down the aisle, turned slowly. Her voice was low, deliberate, and laced with venomous sweetness. Because some things are for passengers who follow the rules and respect the space they're in. Let's work on that, okay? The words hung in the air like smoke. A few passengers glanced forward. One woman looked uncomfortable, another shook her head. But no one spoke. Zuri flinched. Talia squeezed Cairo's hand even tighter. The hush of the cabin deepened as the lights dimmed, casting a golden hue that made everything feel more elegant than it really was, except in row 1, where warmth never arrived. Loretta reappeared 20 minutes later under the guise of a routine check, but lingered only at the Hale's row. Her clipboard in hand, she studied their seating configuration with feigned concern. "I'm going to recommend a seat shift," she announced flatly, addressing Quinton and Talia as if they were cargo. "Your build and positioning are throwing off aisle symmetry." Talia blinked. "I'm sorry." Loretta didn't elaborate. She pointed to Quinton. "You'll need to switch with the passenger in 2A. It will help with weight distribution." Quinton opened his mouth slightly, not to argue, but to clarify. Before he could say anything, Loretta added coolly, "It's not a request. It's a comfort adjustment." He rose without protest, a slow mechanical movement, and relocated to the window seat in the next row. From behind, he could still see his wife and kids, but the distance felt wider than the space suggested. Cairo looked back over the seat, puzzled. "Why is Dad over there now?" Zuri didn't answer. Loretta did. "Sometimes people need space." She delivered the line like it was a life lesson. Talia adjusted in her seat, shielding her children with her shoulders. She gave Quinton a fleeting look, calm, composed, but laced with silent fire. Minutes later, Loretta offered wine to Mrs. Downing in 1F, and then turned, pausing beside Zuri. "You don't seem very social for a teenager. Maybe that's a good thing." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Not everyone needs to be on TikTok." Zuri stiffened. Her hands slid deeper into the pocket of her hoodie. Loretta stepped closer, her voice dropping. "We've had incidents with emotional passengers before. Best not to let feelings run too loud up here." Talia, who heard it all, turned her head slightly toward Loretta, but said nothing. The message was clear. This wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about dominance. Later, when Cairo asked if he could sit on his father's lap for a minute, Loretta appeared almost instantly. "No," she snapped, voice sharp enough to pierce conversation nearby. "Seat jumping is prohibited. You're not on a bus." Cairo flinched and slumped back into his seat. Talia held her composure with a practiced stillness, as if her spine were made of steel rods. Zuri whispered something to her mother, barely audible. Talia leaned in but didn't reply. Loretta continued past them, adjusting her collar as if satisfied. The rest of first class lounged in peace, wine glasses tilted, movies flickering, laughter occasionally rippling through the air like waves that stopped just short of row 1. Mr. Collins peeked back again, his brows pinched with discomfort, but said nothing. Loretta intercepted his gaze. "We're managing," she said with a light tone, then leaned in and added, "Families can be unpredictable. It's important to keep energy balanced." Collins nodded once, slowly. "Of course," he said, though his voice was quieter than before. Another 15 minutes passed. Loretta circled back to check on seatbelts again, her third time, and when she reached Zuri, she tugged gently on the strap near the girl's waist. "Still a little loose," she muttered, pulling tighter. Zuri recoiled at the touch, a barely perceptible flinch, but Loretta caught it and smiled. "There we go. Better safe than sorry." At that moment, the subtlety gave way to something more pointed. Loretta stood back, assessing the scene like a curator evaluating a flawed sculpture. She tilted her head at Talia. "If you'd like, ma'am, we can move your daughter further back. Sometimes solo space helps with regulation." Talia's nostrils flared, but her voice remained measured. "She's fine where she is." Loretta's tone iced over. "It's just a suggestion. Some people travel better alone." Then she glanced briefly at Quinton in row 2. "He seems to be doing just fine." The plane cruised at altitude, engines humming steadily beneath the silence that had taken hold in row 1. The tension that Loretta had cultivated with surgical precision now hovered like static in the air. Cairo sat rigid, knees together, eyes locked on the back of the seat in front of him. Zuri had long since stopped sketching, her notebook buried deep in her backpack, and her gaze flicked cautiously every time footsteps approached. Talia watched both her children as if anticipating the next blow, her fingers brushing theirs at quiet intervals to remind them she was still there. In row 2, Quinton hadn't spoken since being moved. His stillness had turned to something else, less composed, more resigned. Loretta returned to the front cabin with a new air of determination. Her gait was tighter, her expression unreadable. She whispered something to the junior attendant, who glanced at the Hale family nervously, then nodded and disappeared toward the galley. Moments later, Loretta approached again, this time carrying a small trash bag and latex gloves. "Routine sanitation check," she declared in a neutral voice, stopping at row 1. She peered at their tray tables, at the armrests, at the floor beneath their seats. She crouched beside Cairo's feet, inspecting the area with exaggerated scrutiny. "What's this?" she asked coldly, pulling out a half-empty juice carton Cairo had been sipping from earlier. "You're not allowed to store open drinks under the seat. It's a spill hazard." "I was just saving it," Cairo said softly, almost inaudibly. "That's not how this works," Loretta snapped, rising abruptly. "This isn't a playground." She held the juice up in front of him, then dropped it into her trash bag as if discarding a contaminated item. Cairo flinched. Talia inhaled sharply but still said nothing. Loretta wasn't finished. She turned to Zuri. "What's in your pocket?" Zuri blinked. "Nothing," she murmured. "Empty it." Loretta's tone wasn't a request. It was a command. Zuri hesitated, then slowly pulled out a tissue and a pencil. Loretta took both, examined them, then handed them back with a snide look. "Keep your hands visible from now on, for your own safety." Zuri's eyes dropped to her lap. Satisfied with her performance, Loretta turned to leave, but Cairo, his young voice barely above a whisper, said, "That was mine." She turned sharply. "Excuse me." "My juice. I was drinking that. You didn't have to throw it." Loretta approached, leaned in so close her breath brushed his cheek. "Watch your tone, little man. This isn't your living room." She tapped a manicured fingernail on the tray table as she spoke. "I've been patient with you. Don't push it." Cairo shrank into his seat. Talia reached over instinctively to pull her son close, but before she could, Loretta extended a hand, palm up, and in a motion too fast to anticipate, flicked her fingers against Cairo's forehead. It wasn't a full slap, more like a snap, but the sound it made was sharp, a humiliating sting. "Eyes front," she said. "Stay seated." Cairo recoiled, blinking in shock. His lower lip trembled. Zuri gasped quietly, hand tightening around the seatbelt. Talia froze. Her instincts screamed at her to react, to grab Loretta's wrist, to stand and shout, to demand an explanation, an apology, justice. But she didn't. She couldn't. Not here. Not now. Not when every move could be turned against them, could escalate, could get them labeled as threats. So instead, she pulled Cairo toward her, his small body trembling as she held him against her side, whispering something into his curls that sounded like a lullaby, but wasn't. Loretta adjusted her blouse and walked away, as if nothing had happened. Back in the galley, she picked up the flight tablet again and began logging more notes. Passenger 1D, disrespectful behavior. Direct verbal challenge. Physical fidgeting. Parent unresponsive. Recommend CPS alert if repeated pattern observed. She saved the entry with a satisfied tap and checked her reflection in the microwave door. Her expression was calm, her lips perfectly glossed. There was no trace of tension, no trace of guilt. Elsewhere in the cabin, the mood had shifted. Several passengers had noticed the incident, not the full details, but enough to sense something was wrong. Mr. Collins had paused his reading and now watched the aisle with concern. The couple in row 4 whispered to each other. The woman had seen Loretta lean in toward the boy. She wasn't sure what had happened, but it didn't feel right. Loretta noticed the glances. She didn't care. She returned to row 1 half an hour later with new reminders. She asked Zuri to remove her hood, claiming it violated the airline's safety policy. Zuri obeyed without question. She told Talia that her seat was slightly reclined during a no-recline period, despite the seatbelt sign being off. Talia pressed the button to adjust it upright, her expression blank. Then Loretta told Cairo he needed to sit still or she'd have to involve a captain. Cairo, now pale and silent, nodded once and didn't move again. Near the back of the cabin, the junior flight attendant approached the beverage cart and quietly asked the lead purser if someone could watch the front. She didn't give a reason. She didn't say what she'd seen. She just looked uneasy. Loretta, however, felt more in control than ever. In her mind, she was restoring order. This wasn't racism, it was about standards, about image, about what first class used to be. She saw herself as the last line of defense for exclusivity. Zuri suddenly turned toward the aisle and tried to reach for her backpack, which had slid forward during turbulence. Loretta appeared again. "Don't grab under the seat during flight," she snapped. "Do you want to set off an alarm?" Zuri stopped mid-motion, her hand suspended, frozen. Loretta's stare pinned her there for 3 seconds before she turned and stalked off. Cairo's head now rested against Talia's arm, his eyes glassy, breathing soft and uneven. Zuri sat motionless, her hoodie removed, her hands folded like she was bracing for a verdict. Talia didn't move either. She kept her posture upright, but the stillness wasn't strength, it was armor. She had counted every slight, every bruise made without fists. She had felt the sting in her son's silence and seen it reflected in her daughter's eyes. But still, she didn't move. She couldn't. Not when the wrong breath could trigger escalation. Loretta returned, clipboard in hand. But this time her pace was slower, deliberate. She stopped just short of row 1, flipping through laminated seat maps. "There's been an update to the weight distribution calculations," she said, her tone neutral but firm. "For safety, we're relocating 2 of you." She looked up, meeting Talia's eyes like a challenge. 1 parent, 1 child. Talia's expression didn't change. "You've already moved my husband." Loretta ignored the comment. "Due to the layout of the aircraft, we'll need one of the children relocated to another section. Just a few rows back, business class." Her voice made it sound generous, like a favor. Zuri blinked slowly. "Why just us?" she asked quietly. Loretta turned to her like a snake would turn to prey. "We're making a safety call. Let's not turn this into something it's not." She smiled, but it was cold, hollow. "Passengers in row 3 will be happy to help escort." Zuri looked to her mother. Talia's jaw tightened. "We'll stay together," she said flatly. Loretta's smile thinned. That wasn't the question. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If you don't comply, I'll need to file a refusal to cooperate report. That stays on your record. It may affect future travel. I really wouldn't advise it." Then louder, to the passengers behind her, "We appreciate everyone's patience while we handle a seating safety adjustment." Talia stood. Her body moved slowly, controlled, like it was weighed down with chains. She gently guided Zuri up beside her and looked toward row 2, where Quinton had already begun to rise, sensing what was happening. Loretta raised a hand. "Stay seated, sir. We don't need more movement right now." Quinton froze, his fists clenched. not in defiance, but in silent defeat. Talia took Cairo's hand, her knuckles white, and stepped into the aisle. Loretta gestured toward a row near the curtain. "We've prepared these seats. Business class isn't so bad. Sometimes people feel more comfortable there." Zuri followed, but her steps were slower than her mother's. She looked down the aisle, face pale, as if each step meant surrendering something she couldn't name. Cairo didn't speak at all. He didn't look at anyone. The vibrancy that had danced in his voice earlier was gone. Loretta watched them settle into their reassigned seats, like a queen surveying her court. When a passenger 2 rows back muttered, "Was that really necessary?" Loretta smiled and replied, "Cabin balance is a delicate science." Back in row 1, the seat sat empty, untouched, marked now by absence. Quinton was still in 2A, staring at the space where his family had been. Every line of his face was carved with restraint. He had let it happen again, and again, and now this. Minutes later, Loretta passed through the aisle once more. She handed out snacks with bright smiles and cheerful nods. "Biscoff or cashews?" she asked. But when she reached the Hale family in business class, she didn't stop. She walked straight past them without a glance. No snacks, no offer, no apology. Zuri shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her knees drawn slightly toward her chest. Talia stroked Cairo's curls as he leaned on her shoulder, his eyes distant and unfocused. The noise around them, movies, laughter, trays clinking, felt like a parallel world. No one made eye contact. No one reached out. Loretta returned to the front galley and radioed the captain. "Adjustment complete. Family has been moved. Situation is under control." She didn't mention the fear she'd cultivated, the slap that hadn't been called a slap, the lies she'd written into the report. She only spoke the parts that sounded official. The captain's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Understood." 10 rows back, a passenger pulled out her phone and tapped a few words into a draft. "Flight 512 family removed from first class. Not disruptive. Targeted." She hesitated. She wasn't sure if she should send it. The soft chime of the captain's voice announcing descent initiated a ripple of motion through the cabin. Passengers adjusting their reclines, folding blankets, collecting personal items. But the Hale family, now in the cramped middle rows of business class, barely moved. Talia sat with Cairo tucked against her side, her arms wrapped around his small frame, her eyes unfocused, expression carved from stone. Zuri leaned against the cold window, hoodie off, face unreadable. They had not spoken since being relocated. Quinton, still confined in 2A, could only catch brief glimpses of his family through the open breaks between headrests, the wedge of space between him and them now more than physical. It had become symbolic. He hadn't seen Cairo's face in over an hour, only the still silhouette of his son's small body pressed into his mother's side. That fact burned more than anything Loretta had said. Loretta herself returned to the aisle with the same clinical efficiency she had maintained all flight. Her posture was still perfect, her steps measured, her expression carefully composed. But there was something else now, an extra sharpness in her tone, a subtle satisfaction in her movements. She passed the Hale family's new seats and didn't glance down, didn't acknowledge them. But her presence was still felt. She spoke to another passenger nearby, a cheerful man in 6D, offering him a warm towel for freshening up before landing. "Would you like citrus or lavender?" she asked, her voice suddenly sweet again. When she handed him a cloth, she said clearly, "Some people forget to appreciate the little things in premium service." It was a line meant to be overheard. Talia heard it. So did Zuri. Neither reacted. Minutes passed. The seatbelt sign flicked on. Loretta made her final cabin sweep, checking latches that had already been checked, touching seat backs that didn't need adjusting. When she arrived at Zuri's row, she paused for a second longer than necessary, pretended to inspect the overhead bin, and muttered, "Keep your posture straight during landing. Business seats aren't designed for slouching." Her tone was light, her words neutral, but her eyes, those eyes still carried the same silent judgment they had since boarding. Zuri didn't respond. She turned her face toward the window, as if the clouds might offer shelter. The aircraft tilted into descent. Outside, evening light spread across the wing. Inside, Loretta returned to her post near the cockpit door and exhaled slowly, finally relaxing into her own sense of order. The cabin, by her measure, was now corrected, balanced, restored to how it should be. Her clipboard in hand, she surveyed the aisle like a queen observing her realm. Then came the last blow. As the aircraft taxied across the runway, Loretta stepped toward row 2 and addressed Quinton. "Thank you for being so cooperative," she said, her voice low and smooth, like velvet wrapped around a blade. "Some passengers might have made a scene. I appreciate your restraint." It was phrased as a compliment, but the meaning beneath it was pure condescension. You followed the rules. You didn't embarrass yourself. You stayed in your place. Quinton met her eyes just once. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was its own reply. Loretta held her smile for a second longer, then turned away. The aircraft eased to a stop at the gate. Seatbelt signs chimed off. The aisle lit up with the usual flurry of post-landing activity. Bags pulled from overheads, devices turned back on, people already calculating their exit routes. But row 7 remained frozen. Talia helped Cairo sit up, brushed crumbs from his lap, and gently adjusted his small backpack. Zuri stood first, shouldering her own bag, her spine tense. They didn't speak, not even to each other. Quinton rose, in 2A. He did not follow the flow of passengers toward the exit. Instead, he stepped into the aisle and waited for his family to reach him. When they did, they reformed like magnets drawn back together. The reunion was silent, but undeniable. The four of them stepped forward in unison, moving down the aisle with no words exchanged, no smiles given, no goodbyes offered. Loretta stood by the cockpit door, clipboard still in hand. As the Hale family passed her, she offered a final statement. "I'm sure next time you'll choose a cabin that suits you better. Some environments just aren't the right fit for everyone." Her tone was soft, pleasant, but every syllable was weighted. She was daring them to respond, daring them to give her a reason to file one more report. No one answered. They didn't even look at her. They walked past without pause, calm and composed. But then Cairo stopped. Just for a second. He looked up at her, small hand still clutched in his father's, and said, voice steady and quiet but unmistakably clear, "Your smile is fake." The sentence didn't echo. It didn't need to. Its weight sank into the cabin like a dropped anchor. Several passengers turned. One man lowered his phone. A woman stopped mid-step. Loretta blinked. Her jaw tensed. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She said nothing. Cairo turned away and followed his family off the plane. Behind them, silence lingered. Loretta remained at the door, still holding the clipboard, now gripped tighter in her hands. Her face had gone still. No passengers thanked her. No one asked for her name. And for the first time in hours, she looked unsure. The kingdom she had curated so carefully over the course of the flight had just been dismantled with a child's honesty. The Hale family stepped off the plane into the glass corridor of Gate 23, their pace even, their expressions unreadable. The terminal buzzed with airport noise, overhead announcements, rolling suitcases, soft murmurs of arriving passengers. But they moved through it as if insulated, still carrying the silence from the cabin. Quinton's hand remained around Cairo's shoulder, Talia close beside him, Zuri trailing just behind. None of them looked back. Not until the sound of high heels striking tile approached from behind. "Excuse me," a voice called, firm and direct. Talia turned first. A woman in a tailored navy suit caught up to them. Red hair pulled back in a loose bun, a leather satchel slung over her shoulder. She wasn't out of breath. She wasn't flustered. She moved with the confidence of someone used to walking into uncomfortable moments. "I'm sorry to stop you," she said. "My name is Eden Rowe. I'm with Executive Aviation Weekly. Are you Mr. Quinton Hale?" Quinton paused. His face betrayed no surprise. He simply nodded once. Eden's expression flickered, as if confirming something she already suspected. "I was booked on this flight to interview you," she said. "I had a full editorial scheduled. Your team confirmed 3 days ago." She glanced back toward the jet bridge. And yet I just watched your family get removed from row 1 and quietly insulted for 5 hours. Zuri looked up at her, cautious. Cairo stood closer to his father. Eden continued, I know who you are, and I know you're the lead silent investor behind Aero West Prestige's current private equity round. Quinton didn't confirm it. He didn't have to. His silence was an answer. Eden's brow furrowed. Did anyone on board know that? Did that flight attendant have any idea who she was dealing with? Quinton exhaled slowly, then looked down at his son. That's not the point, he said. She treated us like that because she thought she could. Because it's who she is. Talia spoke next. She didn't need to know our name to know better. Her voice was low but resolute. Eden's eyes sharpened. Then I assume you don't mind if I include what I witnessed. She pulled out her phone, opened the Notes app, Flight 512. Cabin discrimination. Physical contact with a minor. Unauthorized reassignment of paid seats. Fabricated reports logged internally, some of which I happened to overhear near the galley. She looked up. With your permission, I'd like to report this. Not just as a story, but as a statement. Quinton didn't answer immediately. He looked at his wife, then at his daughter, who gave the faintest of nods. Finally, he turned to Eden. Tell the truth, he said. No more, no less. Eden nodded. I will. Back in the aircraft, Loretta was tidying up the galley, still basking in the lingering glow of perceived control. She tapped a few final notes into her log report. Passenger conflict avoided, seating concern resolved, family satisfied with alternate accommodations. She slipped off her gloves, folded her apron, and gave herself a quick once-over in the reflective panel of the oven door. She looked proud, unshaken. That pride cracked seconds later when a gate agent stepped onto the plane, leaned in, and said, Miss Sloan, please remain on board. Security and airline leadership are en route. Loretta blinked. What for? The agent hesitated. A passenger has filed a formal misconduct report, with a journalist attached. Loretta's mouth opened slightly. A what? At the same time, phones across the terminal pinged with notifications. Eden had tweeted a single line with an image attached, Cairo looking out the window in business class, his face pressed to the glass. The caption read, Today, I watched a boy get removed from first class by someone who smiled as she did it. He didn't say a word, but when he left the plane, he told her, Your smile is fake. It went viral in under 30 minutes. Loretta stood motionless near the cockpit door, clipboard limp in her hand, her eyes darting between the terminal window and the aisle as passengers continued filing out. Her pulse had climbed steadily ever since the gate agent leaned in and said, Miss Sloan, remain on board. Someone from corporate is coming to speak with you. At first, she had brushed it off, maybe a routine protocol check or a passenger complaint she could smooth over. But as the last of the first-class passengers disembarked and the cabin emptied, that flicker of doubt twisted into something heavier. Her smile, once rigidly maintained, began to crack at the edges. The seconds ticked by, each one louder than the last. Then they arrived. Not a single gate agent or standard supervisor, but 3 individuals in sharply cut suits with the authoritative stride of people who didn't need to introduce themselves. The man in front was tall, silver-haired, and moved with the unspoken air of board-level power. Beside him were 2 corporate liaisons, one holding a tablet already displaying flight records, and behind them, an Aero West internal security officer with a neutral but unwavering stare. The lead executive wasted no time. Ms. Sloan, he said, you are being relieved of in-flight duties immediately, pending an executive review. His tone was cold, procedural, as if reciting a line he had practiced. Loretta blinked, her mouth opening, then closing, her grip tightening on the clipboard. I don't understand. Is this about that family? The executive ignored the question and gestured toward the security officer. Please collect her company-issued tablet, badge, and gate access credentials. Loretta's breath caught. Wait, this has to be a misunderstanding. I didn't even raise my voice. I was professional the entire flight. The officer extended his hand silently. Her fingers trembled slightly as she handed over the tablet. I was managing a difficult situation. A child was behaving erratically. I have it all in my report. The executive gave her a hard look. Yes, we've read your report. We also reviewed the cabin footage, audio logs, and statements from both your colleague and over a dozen passengers. And most notably, the article that was just published by Eden Rowe, an investigative journalist who happened to be seated 4 rows behind the family you mistreated. Loretta's blood drained from her face. That woman, she said weakly. I didn't even know she was a reporter. You didn't need to, the executive replied coldly. You didn't treat the Hale family poorly because you knew who they were. You treated them that way because you didn't, and because you believed you could. The silence that followed was heavier than any turbulence. Loretta's lips trembled. She looked down at the floor, then back up at the executive. They never said anything. They didn't even complain. His expression didn't change. They didn't have to. Everyone else did. Back in the terminal, Eden Rowe's article had gone live. The headline blazed across mobile screens like a fire. Behind the smile, how a flight attendant's prejudice brought a Titan airline to its knees. The piece was meticulous, unfolding in a minute-by-minute timeline of what she witnessed aboard Flight 512. It quoted Loretta's actual words. It described her microaggressions, the flick against Cairo's forehead, the forced separation of the family, and the false safety reassignment that moved them from row 1 to business class. Eden included direct quotes from the junior flight attendant, who had confirmed the manipulation of internal reports. She also embedded redacted images of elite logs, which someone from inside Aerois operations had forwarded to the press just hours after landing. Screens across the terminal began to light up with notifications. Influencers, aviation reporters, and celebrities alike began retweeting the story. Cairo's line, "Your smile is fake," had already become a viral moment, spreading like wildfire. Someone had overlaid the quote on a photo of Loretta standing at the cabin door, and it was already gaining thousands of reposts. Another clip surfaced. Phone footage of Loretta forcibly tightening Cairo's seatbelt and scolding him during turbulence. Her tone in the video, once defended as stern but fair, now looked clearly hostile. Under the microscope of mass attention, her behavior wasn't just inappropriate, it was indefensible. Meanwhile, inside Aerois headquarters in Manhattan, an emergency leadership meeting was already underway. At the head of a long mahogany table sat Quinton Hale, no longer just the quiet man in seat 1A, but now revealed as the company's primary silent investor, and after a recent buyout, a member of the board's oversight committee. He said little, but when he did, every voice in the room went silent. Talia sat beside him, composed, powerful, presenting a folder of proposals she and her team had been preparing quietly over the last 6 months. Measures to combat unconscious bias, redesign internal training, and restructure passenger treatment protocols for all cabin classes. Zuri, seated quietly beside her mother, watched with wide, steady eyes, absorbing everything. She was no longer the silent teenager curled into her seat. She was part of the reason they were here. And Cairo? He sat at the end of the table, gently coloring a rocket ship on a printout from the airline's PR packet. His drawing was quiet, but somehow it anchored the room. None of the executives dared interrupt him. Back at the airport, Loretta sat alone in a holding office, no longer in uniform. Her name badge had been surrendered, and her phone vibrated incessantly on the table in front of her. Notifications rolled in, missed calls, suspended social accounts, blocked access to company systems. An email popped up, subject: termination hearing scheduled within 48 hours. Another followed, formal legal notice, pending civil review. Her hands hovered over the screen, then dropped into her lap. She had lost control, not in a moment of rage or a public scene, but through a slow, deliberate pattern that had finally been exposed. She had believed she was doing her job. She had convinced herself that enforcing standards made her indispensable. But no one was defending her now. Passengers from Flight 512 began speaking out. Mr. Collins, the quiet professional from row 2, submitted a signed statement detailing Loretta's actions and tone. The couple in row 4 recorded a video interview with local news, recounting how uncomfortable they felt as witnesses. Even the woman who had heard Cairo whisper about mean people confirmed that he had not been disruptive, only quiet and terrified. Their accounts all aligned. No one described a misunderstanding. They described a pattern. As the day wore on, social media threads became testimony logs. Former AeroWest employees came forward with their own stories about Loretta, how she had humiliated passengers, manipulated reports, and skirted consequences through charm and seniority. The airline's internal HR file, once buried with polite language like needs coaching or inconsistent tone. 3 weeks later, the story had not faded. In fact, it had intensified. National outlets picked up Eden Rowe's original article, amplifying the incident into a larger cultural conversation. Morning news panels dissected the footage. Talk shows debated airline ethics. Social media lit up with threads recounting similar experiences, many referencing the Hale family's ordeal as a catalyst. Loretta Sloan, once invisible to the public, had become a symbol of unchecked authority, of everyday cruelty masquerading as professionalism. Her name now appeared in headlines, in op-eds, in satirical videos. Her photo, once a smiling staff headshot from the AeroWest site, now circulated beside words like entitled, unfit, and disgraced. Within the AeroWest boardroom, reforms swept quickly. Talia Hale was officially appointed as head of a newly formed passenger equity task force, reporting directly to the board. Zuri's quiet resilience during the flight inspired the relaunch of the company's youth travel initiative, renamed the Zuri Project, which focused on mental health accommodations and traveler dignity across age groups. And Cairo, whose words had echoed across the globe, was featured in a closed-door summit video that opened with a simple title card. Sometimes truth comes from the smallest voice. Meanwhile, Loretta's world shrank. Her termination was finalized with a unanimous vote. Legal action followed. Civil claims filed by the Hale family's legal team, backed not out of vengeance, but as a precedent. Multiple former passengers joined the case. AeroWest, eager to correct course, did not protect her. In fact, they issued a public apology to the Hale family, and to every passenger we failed to protect. We acknowledge the harm, and we commit to doing better. Loretta's name was scrubbed from staff records, her employee portal locked, her access to industry certifications revoked. Her union declined to appeal on her behalf, citing egregious misconduct and a violation of core ethical codes. Without her uniform, without her title, Loretta faded into silence. She attempted to defend herself online, posting a single statement about feeling misrepresented and ambushed by cancel culture, but it was swiftly ratioed into oblivion. Screenshots of her past behavior emerged. Passenger testimonials piled up. No one wanted excuses. They wanted accountability. In her small apartment, curtains drawn, she watched a news segment where Talia Hale spoke calmly about empathy. "We never asked to be seen as important," Talia said. "We just asked to be treated like people. And sometimes the only way to force a system to listen is to let it break in front of everyone." Loretta turned the television off. At the same time, across the country, Cairo sat in a school auditorium as his classmates applauded the short documentary made about his family's experience. Zuri, sitting beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder as the screen faded to black and the final quote reappeared in white letters. "Your smile is fake." The audience grew quiet, and then the applause returned, louder, stronger, not just for the story, but for what it stood for. Quinton Hale, ever quiet, never stepped into the media spotlight. He didn't need to. His actions reshaped policy. His silence commanded rooms. And in his final message to the AeroWest executive team, he wrote just 2 lines. "We don't rise by humiliation. We rise by dignity. Make sure your employees understand the difference." Loretta's fall was not cinematic. It was methodical. She was never publicly arrested, never screamed on camera. But she lost everything: her career, her reputation, her credibility, because she weaponized her authority against people she believed were powerless. And when the truth surfaced, it did not need volume. It needed only to be undeniable. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next twist. What part hit you the hardest? Cairo's quiet words, the family's silent strength, or Loretta's final fall? Tell us in the comments, and let us know where in the world you're watching from.